pray. Amen.
Amen.
I don't know what your impression of insurance people are, but I've known this guy longer than he's known me, and I've been familiar with the insurance agency, as it's now known, Church West, for many years. They've opened their doors to us. Even when I was on the board over at Thousand Pines, they said, hey, you know, use our conference room. So we were able to do that, and they just always are quite open. Charlie Cutler did not ask to speak and sell some insurance today, and that would be very appropriate to make a few commercials if you'd like to do so. This Church West is where we endorse, and through our local agency, Charlie Cutler, and our local agency, Church West, through Charlie Cutler and staff, as well as Brotherhood Mutual, that's the broader umbrella. There's other ways we could choose to go about it. There's a national policy, but we like our local people, so we're going to stay local. And one of the reasons is we can call them up at the last minute and say, hey, can you help us navigate these liability waters? Now, many of us have talked about that before, and in fact, it may sound like the same old thing to some of you. But there are new things happening. One is, if you've been familiar with John MacArthur's church, Grace Church in Sun Valley, they're making the news. I just finished reading, well, skimming the 97-page complaint brought on by the County of Los Angeles because they're continuing to meet. What does that complaint mean? Not so much as the fines of $1,000 a day potentially for every day that they're shown to be in violation. What does it mean to the 1,100 John and Jane Does that are there? I'm more concerned with whether or not lawsuits could prevail if somebody gets the virus and somehow thinks they can prove it chased down to our churches. So here we go. We're not going to use this time to judge anybody. There are some churches that said, yeah, we're opening in a limited way, or we're opening, you know, in a big way. And others that are saying, we're going to stay social distancing and meeting outside, as some are doing, and following the state guidelines. So before I chew up all the time, Charlie Cutler, I'll let you take it over, and thank you for the valuable service that you provide to our region and to several of the churches within our region.
My pleasure. I appreciate the time, and I appreciate you coming to me when you saw some national resources that said, hey, this is about reopening church, and I was like, oh, wait, we've got some things that are specific to our region here in the Southwest, and we're going to be talking about SH, looking at ABCOFLASH. You know, there's an SH and then there's an LA part of it. And so you've got two different situations, because LA is extremely different than the Southwest and Hawaii, which is extremely different than national. And it's also extremely different than if you were going to be in Florida or New York or something else. So we're going to be looking specifically in California. We're going to look at LA, and we put together something that's kind of a 10-step guide on reopening your church, and depending on where you are is when you're going to be able to jump into that process. We'll also talk about liability coverage, how it applies if you are going to take the path that John MacArthur's church is going to be taking, or what is it? There's a Calvary Chapel out in Thousand Oaks and a few others that maybe aren't hitting the headlines, but want to talk about that as well. So Andy, can I share my screen?
Please do.
Is that? It doesn't let me.
Doug Hubbard is diligently working on allowing you that access right now.
And I won't talk much insurance stuff, but most of you know us from Church West. We were the Cutler Group, or Tom Cutler and Associates, been around for 50+ years. I hope you don't know Bob, who's on here. Bob is who, he's the primary attorney that we use for complex litigation. And he's been a tremendous resource for us for 30+ years. And I said, Bob, can you join us on this and answer some of the kind of what ifs and what abouts that we see coming up? So, oh, Doug. Look at that. All right. I think I'm sharing. Am I sharing, guys?
You
You
are.
are sharing.
All right. Let's see which screen we're looking at. Okay, let me just make sure that I'm sharing the right screen. Okay, there we are. There's the, before we gather, that's, you know, it's the planning as we go down this path. I also wanted to show you, got a picture of Andy before he went with the hipster barista look with the beard. He needs a neck tattoo to finish the look for the, to be the barista. I'm sorry. I just thought it was pretty funny seeing that one on the website. We need to update your website, Andy.
This was supposed to be very temporary. May and some of the pastors, one of which is on this call, we said, let's grow our facial hair out as sort of a razor fast until this thing's over. We figured it'd last 2 or 3 weeks. So.
Oh no, it's going to be down to your belly button.
I'll show you my piercings later. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. And then I mentioned Bob, and Bob's been a tremendous resource for us as well. And then, you know, I've got a staff. We've got, I think, close to 40 people in our office throughout the state, working with over 3,000 ministries, and we are the primary agency for Brotherhood Mutual in California. So that's all the insurance commercially you're going to get today, Andy. I will give you a disclaimer. You know your ministry better than we do. You know your people better than we do. You know your current community and what you're called to do better than we do. We're just giving you guidance and resources. We are going to send you kind of a model 10-step plan that you can adapt to your ministry, and I'll go through that with you. There's some other resources that we'll provide you with. And then, Andy, will a recording of this webinar go out to everybody?
It will be available, yes.
Okay, great. And then as new info is made available, we'll make sure that we send it to you. We've had probably, 30 webinars. Bob has been a tremendous resource for our agency. I think we've done 10 on HR issues through the pandemic. We did one yesterday about the Supreme Court ruling, or day before yesterday, on the Supreme Court ruling and how that impacts ministries. And we've got quite a bit that we've done. Schools is a whole separate matter. On our website, if you go to churchwest.com, we've got a webinar recording, we've got a slide deck, and then a reopening plan for schools, along with a lot of resources. I'll confess here that when the pandemic started, I broke our website, and it gave us I started making some changes. I broke everything, so it gave us an opportunity to rebuild it, and we rebuilt it, really focusing on resources for ministry continuity during this time. So I'd encourage you to look at it. But if you look at reopening schools, there's a 12-step guide to reopening schools. And do any of the ministries have schools here on the call? Preschools or distance learning centers?
Several do. Several do, as well as we have a major ministry partner that's a high school that we're very concerned with. They're opening.
For Heritage?
Yeah. We're not operating it anymore, but we're significantly invested in their success.
Sure. No, I'm friends with Jeremy, the new head of schools there, and we've been texting on how to reopen, and we've been working on that pretty actively. But that's a whole nother conversation, but there are tremendous resources on the website for reopening schools, and it's very tricky depending on where you are. So we've spent a lot of time, and again, Bob, thank you for all the time that you've given us in our office. And if there's particular questions that you need help with, I'll have Bob's contact information available to everybody as well. So I'll do kind of the quick timeline. We had the stay-at-home order, and then a lot of churches were wanting to reopen on Pentecost Sunday. There were, sign this petition, recall Newsom, all kinds of things that were going on. And so they said, okay, by May 31st, Pentecost Sunday, we're going to let you reopen, and here's the guidelines. And then it was going to be reviewed on June 21st. The 21st came around, and we heard nothing. And then July 3rd, no singing, no chanting. That was prohibited at that point. So we're going to start, I don't know, what do we do? Whistle in church and hum? I don't mean to say that. I don't mean to make light of it. This is a serious thing, and I don't mean to make jokes. It's just been crazy here in California. So anyway, the singing, chanting came in around July 3rd. Then July 6th, they said, okay, we're going to open county by county. And then the 13th, everything was shut down again. And then July 29th, there were new guidelines that were released. And so it has been so confusing. And so as soon as the church gets started to reopen or something, then everything changes again. So what we've done is when we saw the guidelines, I take it and I go to Bob and I'm like, Bob, let's review what these 26-page guidelines say. And the first thing that we look at, because it's so vague, we said, let's look at the musts, because the musts are the things that we need to look at when reopening church. And it's going to vary whether you're in LA or whether you're in Arizona or whether you're in Hawaii. But the musts for these guidelines, and these are the CDC guidelines and the State Department of Public Health guidelines. You know, one was you must discontinue singing. We must limit indoor attendance to 25%. We'll talk about MacArthur in a minute and others that decide to defy that order. It says employees must wear face coverings. And then the face coverings cover the nose and mouth. You shouldn't share face coverings. I don't know that there's a problem with people sharing face coverings. And then employers for churches, you must provide that material to your employees, and then you must take reasonable measures. So those are really the must things that you must do. And we tried to narrow it down, and those will be kind of outlined in the 10 steps. And then in addition to the musts, there's a critical thing. They say there's a critical thing. It's how do we respond? How do we respond if one of our employees comes down with it? How do we respond if we find out that Andy was preaching on Sunday and then Tuesday he had a positive diagnosis? How do we do contact tracing? And so those are the things that they say you must do. And then the critical thing is the contact tracing. And then the last thing is with the CDC guidelines, it says it's going to be regular reviews. And this is what they did at the end of July, is they said we're going to have the local departments of public health are going to be involved in this decision and about reopening. And so in LA, they've essentially said, no, you're not going to be allowed to reopen. In Ventura County, you've had some courts that have said, hey, I hear you're reopening and we're not going to let you do it. And we may send the sheriff's department out there to shut you down. And so there's, it's really on a local level, and it's going to be different in each area that you're at. So that's just kind of an overview of where things stand. Go ahead, Bob. I see you're ready to talk.
Yeah. First of all, I'm really glad to be on this program. Thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here. It's good to see Andy again. He probably doesn't remember, but years ago, many years ago, fortunately for Thousand Pines, I did represent your organization in some sort of a matter. And I was, of course, shocked when I saw you here this morning. I didn't realize all that growth had come in since that time. So anyway, it's good to see you. What couple of things that you mentioned, I think that are extremely important, at least from the standpoint of questions that we're getting from our clients, Charlie, is you mentioned the guidelines keep changing. Things change so rapidly. And one of the earlier slides that you indicated that you had up on the screen was a whole list of resources. We're getting a lot of calls regarding daycare, preschools, after school programs, these kinds of things that are licensed through community care licensing. Surprisingly enough, community care licensing, as I understand it, at least in Los Angeles, has a special task force to help licensees determine where they are with respect to opening and that kind of thing. So that's another resource that you might want to look at. There are also various exemptions that are available depending upon the nature of the program that your organization might be putting on. So it's possible that even though you're not licensed to open completely, you might fall into one of the exemptions. But again, Charlie, as you mentioned, these things vary from county to county. The things that I was just referring to are in Los Angeles County, but it's very important to stay up to date in the county in which you're working.
So one of the questions that everybody has, and this is what Andy had first kind of come to me with, he says, are we covered if we reopen? And that is one of those questions that you don't know. I mean, nobody can tell you you're going to be covered before a claim ever happens, because they're going to say, what was it that what were the facts of the matter? You know, what did you do? One of the questions that comes up is, you know, what if somebody contracts COVID at a church-sponsored activity, whether it was a church service, whether it was we went to the park and socially distanced and somebody contracted it. You know, the most likely scenario that somebody says, hey, I contracted COVID, we have one ministry that Bob and I both work with. They had 149 people. This is a ministry in New York. They had 149 people at the very beginning, it was early March, that gathered because they were limited to 150. Well, they had 70 people that contracted coronavirus following that service. And afterwards we looked at it, we said, well, what is the liability? And I'm speaking very generally. It's just like the flu. It's just like something else that you get. You'd have to prove that somebody came, that they caught it there. It's the only place that they caught it, and that the ministry was negligent in doing it. If you did it in such a way that you didn't take reasonable steps to care for somebody, if you do break the law, there is increased liability. I mean, that's just the fact of the matter. We don't know what the facts are until the claim comes up. We don't know what the plaintiff's attorney is going to say. There is increased liability for reopening. But if you're operating within the guidelines of the law, if you're operating legally, there's much less liability than if you were to go like MacArthur's Church and reopen. I wish I could say, hey, you are covered for this no matter what. I can't. But what I can say is, you know, we look at the exclusions. If you look at the exclusions, this is what it says. The exclusion is any loss that is expected, directed, or intended by any insured or covered person. Or it's the willful, wanton, or malicious act of any insured or any covered person. That's what it says in your insurance policy. Those are the things that, if you did something really, you know, it crammed everybody into a room, you just said, hey, this is just, it's not real, you know, and it's not a real, I don't know, we're going to, if you said something along the lines of, everybody was going to take communion and share a cup. If you had the kids coming in, you know, just, we've seen some goofy things that churches have done. You've heard about some churches in Florida. Don't do that kind of stuff. We want to be reasonable and take reasonable care and take this seriously. But when it comes to the exclusion, I want to tell you, there's an exclusion, and I just want to tell you, this is for ABCOFLASH's policy, and this is what yours says. Everybody's policy might be a little bit different, but it asks about the willful harm or violation of any local, state, or federal criminal statute. That's something that you got to take seriously. If you say that we're intentionally reopening, and if we are going to just go ahead and reopen no matter what, we're not going to care, well, you've willfully violated a local, state, or federal criminal statute. But your insurance company, Andy, has said it wouldn't apply to losses which result from the failure to follow executive civil orders. And the reason they say that is they say an executive order is a law, but, and I want to read this because this is from the insurance company. It says, the governor has issued an executive order, which is law. The exclusion in the policy applies to a criminal statute. A statute is defined as law passed by a legislative body and codified under state code. The governor's order is a law, but the exclusion wouldn't apply because it is not a statute. I know it sounds like, you know, legally somebody's sitting here saying, well, maybe you're covered, maybe you're not covered. I think that your insurance company, Brotherhood, has been pretty bold in saying, if you're going to gather and you feel that, you know, due to your deeply held religious beliefs that we need to gather, and it may be towing the line a little bit, I think they built in a little bit of grace into their policy wording. But I just can't give you anything more solid than that, and I wish I could. Bob, what are your thoughts? Am I guiding people down the wrong path here?
No, I don't think so, Charlie. I'm looking at the top of the page too, and when you look at this language, the quote there, it says willful harm or the violation of a statute. Clearly, by opening your church, you may be willfully intending to hold services, but I would argue on behalf of the church that you're not willfully intending to harm anyone. Quite to the contrary, you're intending to benefit individuals. So, you know, one of the important things too, Charlie, is that we have had so many of these governor's orders, not only in California, but everywhere else. And we have very, very little case law to guide us under these circumstances as to what the impact of these are. So we're using kind of old law to help us interpret how we're going to deal with a pandemic situation, which is brand new. But you know, I look at this and ask myself, is anybody intending to cause harm here? Clearly, that isn't the case at all. And that's the intent generally of a criminal statute, is to prevent willful harm.
Yeah. And I think that it's good to follow the guidelines that we're going to send to everybody. And these are the 10-step program. I think that that is helping to prevent harm. And, you know, we're taking reasonable steps, and we'll go through those. I think it was Debbie that had sent something to me that said, hey, what about a waiver? How does this waiver look? And a lot of ministries have said, well, can't we just gather and have a waiver? And so we put together some waivers for you. Sorry, that's bad. They're all you're welcome, Bob. These are our waivers. I like this one. No, the waivers are very unique, and I'm sorry, the laws governing waivers are very unique, and in California, there's specific guidelines, and we'll send this to you, but this is what a solid waiver is going to look like in California. Bob, can you talk a little bit about the waiver?
Happy to, Charlie. In California, in order to have a waiver be enforceable or a release be enforceable, the primary issue that the court is going to look at in deciding whether it is to be enforced or not is whether the person who signed the waiver knowingly waived the specific risk that caused the harm. So as an example, if you have a youth group or youth activity or youth program, and you simply have the parents sign on behalf of their kids that they are waiving any liability for any activities that the youth group might get involved in over the course of the summer, that's extremely broad. On the other hand, if you have a parent sign a waiver on behalf of a child for a specific rafting trip going down a river, and the release says that the risks involved is that, you know, you could end up in the water, you could end up drowning in the water, you could end up becoming ill in the water, and all of these other things, then the release is very specific. And in those circumstances, the court can find that the party providing the release was aware of the specific risks that ultimately ended up causing the harm, and that party has waived that liability. So the waiver that you have on the screen here, Charlie, is as specific as it can be with respect to not necessarily the activity that you're getting involved in, but the risk that you're getting involved in, and that risk is the risk of contracting the COVID-19 virus. So I think it's very important that these be in place. I know certainly in our practice, a number of churches have balanced in their minds the propriety of either asking people to sign the release versus the potentially, as they viewed it, a chilling effect of bringing people into church and them not wanting to sign a release and therefore not coming into church. That's a balancing each church has to do on their own. But this particular release, I know I've looked at it, Charlie. I think I worked with your office on it. It does address this specific risk. So based on California law, as we see it, this should be an appropriate one.
I think these were the key points in a California waiver, is that it's got to be well drafted and unambiguous. It's got to be a 12-point font. It's supposed to be readable. It should be in the language of the person that's signing it. We only have it in English at this point. So, but we'll send it to you, and it's up to your ministry to see if it's appropriate for the culture, for the activities, for you to use it. But we wanted to provide you with the resource that was California specific. And then again, you know, they're new. Most waivers, most policy, or most waiver wording, I guess you could say, has been interpreted by courts and court cases, and people fight over these for years and years. These are all brand new. And so I don't know, I don't know the value necessarily of the waiver but it's, I think it's helpful, Bob. Would you agree? But it's not the be all end all.
No, it isn't the be all end all, Charlie. And signing a waiver certainly isn't, isn't determinative of what the result is going to be. However, when we are guiding clients or counseling clients, we are trying to provide them with as many risk management tools as we possibly can and trying to put them in the very best position they can be in the event that something goes wrong. So in my opinion, you're certainly better off using the waiver than not using the waiver, because it's a risk management tool that we see as favorable.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's part of the things that you need to consider, but those are usually the biggest things. Are we covered, and can we get a waiver? But I want to kind of go into the preparation. Our philosophy is that if we want to prepare as if somebody that's going to be in attendance is infected, and also somebody that's going to be in attendance is going to be at higher risk. I think that if you take that mindset from the very beginning, we're going to be doing things that are reasonable to protect everybody that would be attending. I did have one ministry that reopened on Pentecost Sunday, and the person that was outside taking temperatures of everybody as they walked in on Sunday, on Wednesday, well, that was Sunday. Monday, she was taking temperatures of all of the employees as they were coming into work and all of the preschool kids that were at the preschool that stayed open for essential workers. Wednesday, she wasn't feeling well. Thursday, she came down with coronavirus and got a diagnosis. And they had her masked up and she had gloves on, and it didn't spread, but they took it very, very seriously. And you never know who the person is that could come down with it. And I think that we want to just really take it seriously. I'll tell you what was pretty cool. This is a video. I don't know how this is going to show up here, Andy, but this is a video that one ministry took of their COVID return. I'll send this link to you. I think it was really helpful to look and see how the church reopened. And let's see here. Can you hear it? Andy, nod. Can somebody nod if they can hear it? You can't hear it? Okay.
A little bit.
Okay.
But not well.
But let me talk over it as we're going through. But I think it was really helpful to look at it and say, this is what a church service looked like. It's not going to look like MacArthur's church service. MacArthur's church, they said, everybody come in, do what you want. This is a ministry that took it really seriously, and they distanced everybody. This is a big facility. They put bags over each one of the chairs. They had everybody, they required masks for everybody that was in attendance. They encouraged spacing all the way through. And I was at this church service, and I forgot how much you miss church. When you've missed church for a couple of weeks, or skipped church for a couple of months, and then you went back. It was very emotional. It was a really cool experience. Everybody wore masks. The people that were on the stage didn't wear a mask. This is when singing was still permissible. And pastor would preach, he'd take the mask off. As he left the pulpit, he put the mask back on. And I think they did a very good job of it. And this video will be sent out to you so that you can kind of look at it, maybe learn from it and apply it to your ministry. I thought it was really cool. That was cool. Have you seen that before, Bob?
I hadn't seen that specific video. I'm very familiar with Water of Life. They take these things very seriously. And my understanding is the reaction from the congregants to these things has been very, very favorable because it shows the congregation that you care. You care not only about getting church open, but you care about protecting them and trying to keep them safe at the same time too. So my understanding is that this is a very good tool, not only from a safety standpoint, but from a relationship standpoint with your congregation and showing them how much you love them.
Yeah, and so we've got the 10-step plan, but that video is kind of looking at that 10-step plan in action. All right. So, all right, these are the different components of it, and we'll be sending you this slide, and I'll go over each one of these 10. And I know we can all read, so I'm going to just kind of discuss each one of these areas. And if you guys have questions, just chat. And we've got a small enough group that I'm glad to address anything, and Bob can help too. And the way that we took this and the way that we designed this, let me go back, is we took it from the very beginning where you're just considering it and you're saying, okay, from the beginning to preparing your facility, developing the plan, inviting people to the church, then once people arrive. And so it's kind of taking from planning to the end of your first church service is kind of the flow of this, this plan. So the reopening team, grab folks that are involved in the church. Don't put the pastor in charge of it. The pastors will inevitably, I don't want to say mess it up, but not, they'll mess it up. But they're not the best when it comes to policies. We've learned that. Grab some of the leaders in your church that are gifted in this way. Is a nice way to put it. But also look at the people in your congregation. People, there's a lot of people that are doing this in their professions, and they've gone through this in their business and the school that they work at or whatever it might be. They can be very helpful to be as part of your reopening team. And I know as Baptists, we love our committees. And so this would be another committee that you could put together, but it's, I think it's really important to have that in every aspect of ministry. And then this is something that I think Smart Church Solutions, they put together a great reopening checklist for, and this, again, I'll send this to Debbie. I know that's where it should go, and Debbie will get it out to everybody. But this is just kind of a checklist that your facility team, your facility committee can look at and say, hey, let's double check our facility and make sure that we're ready to reopen. Okay, so this is beforehand. Then the next step 3, is this is our response and contact tracing plan. I'll tell you, this is really important because we've had, I'd say a few times a week now, because we work with about 3,000 ministries in schools and colleges. I'd say at least 3 times a week, we're having somebody call us up and say, we've got an employee that came down with it. We've had a preschool teacher. We had one ministry, they had 3 preschool teachers come down with it all in 1 week. And we had to go through the contact tracing plan. It's real. This happens, and we should be prepared beforehand. And so this is the guidelines on what you should do beforehand. Have a designated person within the congregation manage this. And again, don't have it be the pastor. The pastor has other things they should be doing. And then also coordinate with local public health authorities and talk to them, because really what you're going to be doing is you're going to be, let's say Andy comes to me on Tuesday and he says, hey, Charlie, I was at church on Sunday. I was outside or wherever it was that I was, but I've contracted coronavirus. I've got a positive diagnosis. At that point, I don't send an email out to everybody in the church, say, hey, guys, guess what? Andy got coronavirus, pray for him. There's violations with things like that. We shouldn't be doing something like that. What you should be doing is you should be transferring that responsibility to the local public health authorities, and then also being there for Andy individually and his family. And that's really what I want to encourage you to do. And I'll tell you, it's different in every area. In some areas, it's a disaster. The public health authorities does not do a good job. And then in other areas, they do an excellent job in contact tracing. So let's leave it up to them. Okay. Sorry, Andy, I didn't mean to tell everybody that you've got coronavirus.
I don't have coronavirus, but I have been diagnosed with a chronic case of cooties since the 2nd grade.
Andy, that can be very serious. So I hope you're having your taken periodically. Charlie, I was going to comment that in the churches that we have dealt with that had a large number of people come down with the coronavirus, of course, the media was all over this and blaming the church and blaming everything about the church. Unfortunately, in my experience dealing with churches for nearly 30 years at this point, the media tends to be very harsh and not very receptive when they do things well. In any event, what it turned out when they really did the contact tracing is that the people that initially were thought to have contracted the coronavirus at church most likely, more than likely, had contracted it from various other locations outside of church entirely. But of course, when you have a large group together and then there are a number of people that end up coming down with it, the media is all over it. One of the things that I think either you, Charlie, mentioned or Andy mentioned was the proof of determining how you contracted the coronavirus. And from a legal standpoint, it's virtually impossible to determine that. You're going to have to assume that somebody has been completely and totally isolated and then suddenly is in the presence of somebody who has it. And there's no way from a legal standpoint to do that. But the blame tends to be on the larger organizations such as the church.
So let me ask you something, Bob. I'm going to throw this one out at you because I don't think you've seen this. Here's a question. Should we keep track of all attendees?
You know, it's not a bad idea. Some of the churches that we have worked with have contemplated doing this. I don't know if they actually went ahead with the plans. I actually know of some restaurants that were keeping track of people that came in. The thought in that is that if something goes awry and somebody does contract coronavirus, it will make it easier for us to get in contact with you and let you know. So depending upon how you present it to the attendees, it can be received in a very favorable manner if it's presented appropriately. On the other hand, if it's not presented appropriately, it can be very off-putting to go to church and have somebody, want to have you write your name down for purposes of tracking you for corona or for anything else. So it's not something that I would discourage folks from doing, but like many of the things that we deal with from a risk management standpoint, if it is presented appropriately, I think it can be a successful tool.
I think in my church, I go to a small church, we have, less than 100 people there. I think that we'd be fine with it. I mean, everybody knows everybody. I think it would be presented very well by the pastor, but I could see a larger church that would be, worried that, Gavin Newsom was going to be grabbing a copy of all of your church attendees and showing up and turning the mayor would turn the power off at their home or whatever. I don't know. So, just, it's up to you. And that's not something that's a requirement that I've seen, but I think it would be a good idea in my church. I don't know that it would be a fit in every church. So, okay. All right. Step 4, it's controlling access when you decide to reopen. This was something that we put together. It took me 10 minutes to put together the online Eventbrite. I did the Church West, I think is what I called it. That's why people are sleeping. But it took me just a few minutes to put together an online reservation and ticketing system. I would encourage you to do something like that because you don't know what's going to happen. I have one ministry that had a lot of outdoor areas, and they had drive-in church services, and they had people reserve spots, and they had about 20% of the people that didn't show up. We've had others where they've had a lot of extra people that have shown up. I think it's a good idea. I think especially if we're limiting to 100, it depends on the number of people that are in your church. If you've got a 1,500 person church, it might be a good idea to do something like that. If you've got a 50 person church, I think it's a little bit more manageable. So it's just one of those things that I think is a tool to utilize, and it's really pretty simple if you haven't used Eventbrite, and it's free. I do think it's important to give communication to everybody beforehand, and there's some model verbiage that came from the insurance company that talks about it. That just says, hey, you know what? We're going to do it. We're going to do it in as safe a manner as possible. And I think that you want to tell people, hey, if your spiritual needs, if your mental health needs, emotional needs are being met at home, online, stay there. But if we're limiting space, we want to hold space for people that are going to need it the most. Because there is a lot of loneliness and depression and emotional needs that aren't being met in this virtual environment. And I think that there is a real there's something that a need that's being filled by having church services in person again, if we can do it in a safe way. So this is just model verbiage that you can use in an email that goes out to people. I would also ask people to self-diagnose beforehand. That you can say, you know, if you're in a high-risk category, we want you to stay at home. And we're going to find other ways to serve you and connect with you. And this link right here, the CDC guidelines, will take people to the CDC guidelines so they can self-check as well. Okay. And then here, it's kind of just an overview of what it is that you're going to be doing on the morning of church services. We're going to be doing this in a safe way. We're going to use social distancing. We're going to ask that you have masks. We're going to ask that you follow, the guidelines. So this is all kind of preparing beforehand and inviting people and then saying, okay, who's going to be showing up? Then you've got to say, all right, let's prepare our facility. And this is just a checklist. And let me tell you the gist of this checklist is that you're wanting to have a flow of traffic. You know, you go into Starbucks now, you've got people that are standing outside and they have you go in one way and then you've got to stop 6 feet, then you got to go another 6 feet, and then you go up, and then you go out the door that you've never used before. Yeah, that's kind of what we're doing in the church service, is we're trying to have a flow of traffic so that you're saying, come into the church service. We're not going to have chairs where people can congregate. We're going to have, we're going to try and keep a flow. And that's what's very challenging in churches, because we've designed environments where people can gather and can fellowship, and you're going to change all of that. And I will tell you, good luck, because people, when they do come back to church, it's tough. It is really tough, because you're missing your church family. And I've been to quite a few church services just to see how they're going to reopen. And inevitably, it's just a real challenge. So first thing is prepare your facility beforehand. Outdoor seating, the guidelines in California are really specific. They say, you know what, if you're going to have outdoor church service, it should be the same as indoor, at least 6 feet apart. You've got family units in one group. If you've got a drive-in service, they're saying, hey, you should have a separation between cars. Hey, Andy, are you aware of any churches that are ABCOFLASH churches that are doing a drive-in service?
It's on the tip of my tongue that one did, but I can't remember which. Doug, do you remember any one church? But I don't remember that any have done that. There are parking lot services, but not drive-in that I know, except it seems like there's one.
Yeah.
Debbie, I attended First Baptist Church of Big Bear Valley, has a drive-up church.
First Baptist of Big Bear?
Uh-huh.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I think it's great. I think those have worked out really well. I mean, that's how Crystal Cathedral started, was, as a drive-in church service, and we're kind of going back that direction. And it was, I think it's something that works out really well, but you can do cars next to people sitting in parking spaces, but we've got to do things just a little bit different at this point.
If I could just comment, we're up to your step 6 here, and it seems when you look at the text that we've been putting up on the screen, it seems like, wow, we sure have a lot of different items to check off on the checklist here. But when you consider all of the things that you've listed there, and then go back and remember that video that we watched from Water of Life, and they have done all of those things. And the presentation was, in my impression, extremely welcoming. So it appears initially that the checklist items can be or could be a big burden, but when they're actually put into place, I think the congregation reacts very well to them, and it can make for a very welcoming environment and make people feel glad that they're back.
Yeah, it was awesome. I was at that first church service, and it was really cool. It was very emotional for a lot of people, and it was neat. So I'd encourage you to do it in a safe way. I think that if you just say, hey, it's a free-for-all, I wouldn't recommend doing that. And I think that this is I don't know. I really liked the way that they did it. I think that this plan is pretty manageable. Thanks, Bob. This is part of it. Now, okay, we've kind of planned everything up to all right, let's get our people ready, let's get our facility ready, let's kind of get our communication ready, and now once people arrive, this is, what should we do? I will tell you that when they arrive, have somebody greeting them in the parking lot, have somebody that has been trained beforehand, directing people to go to a certain area. And church is going to be different than you've ever had it before, the first time. And whenever you change things at church, we get really stuck in routine. I remember our pew was the second pew on the right-hand side from the front. That's where the cutlers sat growing up. And if anybody sat there, everybody was mad. You'd look at people and they would move. So you know how that goes. And that's how we are in church. And when things are different, it's challenging, but get ready for it. It's going to be messy, but it'll be fine. It's the way I look at it. I think I kind of like it when things get a little bit messy at the church. As long as nobody gets hurt, then you know what I mean. Okay, so this is just arriving, guide people, because it's going to be a little bit different. Then once they arrive, this is something that I want to highlight, talking about when they're at the church, your ushers, greeters, deacons, folks that are going to be welcoming people to the church. This is something I want to tell you. The number one thing that I've seen churches struggle with is when they didn't train the ushers and greeters before that first day, kind of do a run through, and have people there, because that your volunteers are going to be 15 minutes late, and you're not going to be able to train them. So do a run through well in advance and say, hey guys, this is what we're going to do, and walk through it a little bit. And so, if you want to do a temperature check beforehand, great. Some churches feel like it's really important. Others say no. And just you're reminding people, and this is the stuff that's been beaten into our heads since March. Wear your mask. Use hand sanitizer, and just kind of continue to encourage people to socially distance. If you are going to track attendees, which some churches may do, that might be when you have them sign an information sheet. And just, hey, sign in, and we'll let you know if there's a contract tracing protocol that we need to go through. Okay, and then these are the things that are specific in the California Department of Public Health guidelines. Communion shouldn't be passed or shared. You should discontinue touch. Don't pass the offering plate. Have a drop box. Worship people that are on the platform or behind the pulpit should be at least 10 feet away. I'd even say a little bit more. And then this is really important, is that after the church service, pastor is going to direct people in the direction that they go and say, okay, guys, we're going out this door now, and point people in that direction, because otherwise it's, how it is after church service. Everybody goes back to the center aisle and then starts making their way to the exit, and everybody's chatting and congregating. So again, concentrate on the flow of traffic and directing people on where they ought to go. And then again, ushers, greeters, everybody should be just sending people on their way. And then the last thing is just to revise, and then look at it and say, hey, where was it a mess this time, and what could we do a little bit better? And just make sure that we're always adapting it. If you put together a model plan, and you adapt the plan that we're sending to you, or actually that Debbie's going to send to you. Am I right, Debbie, that you're going to be the one that's going to send this out, or Andy, or?
Yes,
Doug,
I'm sorry, I was on mute.
Doug has been asking for people to have their emails and send it out if you'd like a copy, just so that we can be ahead of it. We can certainly do it after the fact, but that makes it real easy. And during the chat, several people have been giving emails on where we can send it to. So
okay.
Email us in the chat if you want to be on that list, and that makes it a little easier than trying to send it out to everybody. But we can make it available after the fact, but it's easier now.
Okay, great. So we'll send you the model plan, and then just revise. We got somebody's asked for the waiver. We'll send the waiver to you as well. And then you're going to adapt it to your ministry specifically. So look at some of the other considerations for like an outside group. Bob and I were chatting about this before. The certificates of insurance, Go ahead, Bob. I'll let you just kind of chat about this, considerations you ought to have with an outside group.
Sure. Always with outside groups, certainly the things that we are looking for is, from my standpoint, risk management. And the key from risk management when you're dealing with an outside group is let's move the liability created by their participation from your church back to them. So make sure that they have insurance. Make sure they have what is called an additional insured endorsement. That is extremely important. If you have questions about what the difference between a certificate of insurance is and an additional insured endorsement, feel free to give me a call or give anybody at Church West a call. They'll be happy to help you with that. But that is by far the most important thing, is make sure that they're insured and make sure your church becomes an insured on their policy. So if there's some activity that they are engaged in, particularly in this environment with COVID-19, that causes injury, that it is their organization and their insurance company that is responsible for it. And there's a note, I think, on the screen now about a liability waiver. Certainly make sure that you have a contract with them that reflects that all liability is assumed by that organization, the outside group, as opposed to your church. Those would be the key things.
And I think it's really important to get it updated, because they may have had insurance in January. And you know, there's some insurance companies that have said, hey, if they meet now, there's no coverage for them. If they meet and they've been really clear that there's no coverage for them if it's an outside group or a business or something like that that's violating a law. I don't want one of your tenants to be without coverage, because eventually you'll get dragged into it and you'll be on the hook for it. So get an updated certificate of insurance. So if it's been a few months since they've been meeting, just get a new one. It's not a big deal. It doesn't cost them anything. It's something that I'd recommend. Small group gatherings, yeah, the guidelines say, you know, it's not advised to have them gathering at the church, but some local authorities have said, hey, it's fine if you've got less than 10. I think there's a lot of churches that I think have been having, you know, small groups meeting in homes for church services. And, you know, if you're going to be doing a live broadcast to the church, of the church service, they're saying, okay, Bob, you're going to have a church service in your home, have the same group of folks that are going to be coming every Sunday to your home. So there's some guidelines for that in the California guidelines. I'm sorry, in the California guidance. 12-step groups. This is a group that really needs that support, you know, and that's a challenge. And I think that this is something that this is considered an essential service from the Department of Public Health guidelines. But I would make sure that you're practicing all the things that we have in the 10-step guidelines that would be appropriate for a 12-step group, which is masks, the sanitizer. If they can meet outside, that'd be great. You know, those types of things. Bob, let me ask you this question. This comes up a lot. What if our church wants to have an off-site activity? We've got Doug's church says, you know what, we're going to have a protest, and we're going to go downtown, and we're going to be protesting. It's the church is going to be all going down there together. What is the church's liability when Doug's church as a group goes down and they decide that they're going to protest?
You shouldn't view liability as any different based on the location of the activity. Assume if you're going to the beach, as it says on the screen there, or some sort of activity downtown, assume that this is a church activity. And if people are injured, you can expect that the church is going to end up having a claim against it as being responsible. So I would do a couple of things on that. First of all, if you're going to have an outside activity, I would have the people that are planning that go see the location ahead of time, plan for any contingencies that may occur. Certainly, I would call the insurance broker, call Church West and say, this is what we are planning to do. Is there any reason why this activity wouldn't be covered under the policy? But view the outside activity as just another part of your ministry. And it isn't really any different from my standpoint, whether it's occurring on your premises or someone else's, the exposure to liability is still there.
Hey, Bob, you said something pretty important there about contacting the agency. I think that calling or emailing, getting something in writing, saying, you know, is there something in our policy that would exclude coverage for us to go to this facility? If we were going to go to Thousand Pines for the day, they've got day events there. If you were going to go to Thousand Pines for the day, and get it in writing from your insurance company, is there something that's preventing us from doing this? Okay. LA County is a little bit different. There's an 8-page protocol, and it's not much different than what we put together in that 10-step, but this is the reopening, the houses of worship guidelines for LA, and it's LA County. So that includes Sun Valley. It includes the areas of the high desert. But there's some additional guidelines, but they're not much different than what we put together in that 10-step guide for you. People have asked who should review it or approve our protocols and guidelines for reopening our church. I think that if you send it to us, especially if you have a school or a preschool, I think it would be great to have an attorney review it for you. So I really recommend that you had somebody look at those as well. So are there any other questions? We're right at 3 o'clock. That was pretty good. Did we do good? We said 1 hour.